Hello, how do we get paint onto an object? There are several ways, of course, like always in the 3D animation world, and here I'm showing you basically one or two ways to do it. This is Photoshop. It can be any painting software. I just painted alpha and omega and pixelated it a little bit to make it more retro, whatever. Then I saved the file, not in my scenes folder, but in the project source images folder. You will see that in a second. So let's create a sphere. Get closer to the sphere and create a new material. And for this purpose, I'll create a standard surface Arnold material, which is currently white and quite shiny. As you can see, the shininess comes from that specular weight. If you reduce it, it will be less shiny. And the color comes from this icon here. It's currently white. We want the alpha omega pixelated thing on this object. So we click here, and instead of a standard texture here, we use a file texture. It's right here. And currently we don't see it because of this icon, and it's kind of projects a grayish thing to it. It thinks a file is coming in a second, and it will come in a second. We have to point Maya to the file, image name, click on the folder. It directs us to the project's source images folder where my alpha omega is in. I open it, and it's mapped on that sphere. And if you want to render it, you need to introduce a light, sky dome light, for example, and just render it. It will be okay. You can create interesting textures, as I showed you earlier in earlier tutorials, in other ways as well. Let's go here and go to standard surface shader, and instead of the color image we just planted on that object, we can create an interesting texture which looks like painted. Right mouse button, break connection. So this thing is black now because this is black. So instead of the color black, let's go here again, and this time we use, for example, a grid. The grid looks like this, certainly not like a painting. Here under the color balance, you find the color offset. Choose an interesting color and then go to place 2D texture, and here you have several things you can do. For example, very simple, you can rotate the texture, which already makes it quite interesting. But the key thing to get an interesting texture here is the noise in U and V. That's the coordinates. That's the U and that's the V, or the other way around. So if you increase this value here and this value, you get a very nice surface which looks already as painted. But of course, that's not an interactive painting process. That's a procedural texture. Keep in mind, only 2 clicks and you had this, or 3 clicks, and you had this really nice object here. New scene, don't save. And this time we'll create a plane. And we rotate the plane. We can reduce this easily to like this and like this. And then we pick, actually we deform it a little bit, stretch it in this direction, and we pick this, what is it called? An edge. Double click on that edge here, and then we can move it right here. So we have like a little slightly warped plane here. I didn't want anything else to happen here. Okay, let's go back to object mode. So that's the object we have. And now we go to rendering. Rendering here. And under rendering you find a very old but still vivid 3D paint tool entry here. Rendering, main menu, texturing, 3D paint tool. Click the option box because we need to pick our brush. Okay, it shows me that I cannot paint here. There's a tiny X. Maybe in your case it might be a bigger X. We need to assign or edit textures. I think that's typical for a thing which has been in Maya for such a long time, over 10 years, maybe 15 years or so. So we need to assign a texture. That's the first step. Why doesn't it assign it automatically when we invoke the tool here? Well, it doesn't do it. So now we have a texture assigned and we can paint on it. Now let's go to the first artisan tool. It's called artisan because in the early days they thought this is the best way to paint here and the best name for it. We currently have the color red selected. That's probably because I did something in red. I think the default is white. So we can paint white here. This is the size of our pen. So we write alpha. It's not white, it's like a pinkish white here actually, and now it's more white, alpha. And we can paint in another color, like red, omega. Okay, so that's directly painted on that surface now. Not on the back, here on the front. Now you can get closer to your alpha, for example. I press and hold the key B to make the brush size a little bit smaller. I click this icon. We can make it even smaller, like this, and create tiny little things, maybe in red here, which is a very dark red. Okay, like this. It really looks like a painted object here. Let's move a little bit to the right. And here, painted with texture paint. So it's really interactive and it sits on that surface. If you want to change the whole color, you need to go to flood, and this is the flooding color. It means you flood the whole surface with that blue in this case. We won't need to do this. We go to paint effects and we load a brush from the paint effects. Let's, for example, load not an oil, that would be a typical painting thing, but something really strange, like a plant, like a fern, for example. And then we can paint the fern here on the surface. Of course, it will paint over what we had before, but it's a straightforward way to paint organic looking structures here. When I resize my brush by pressing and holding the key B, make the brush bigger, the fern becomes bigger, like this. And I can get another paint brush. For example, in the fun section I have these wormy structures here. And here they go. They have a 3D-ish look, but they're actually 2D, and they're not, the whole surface is still flat, so they're not in any way 3D. So for final touches here, fibers, maybe this one, and here are the fibers. Now we sort of lost the alpha and omega, so we'll rewrite alpha and omega here using maybe this brush here. Alpha. Oh, I painted in black, why not? Now I paint omega in white. Well, now you can close the tool. You're finished with the organization of painting here, and you have quite an interesting graffiti wall. Of course, your art is certainly better. You can always, because it's saved as a 2D file, as an image file currently, a JPEG, you can always modify it in Photoshop or in other things and bring it back here. Have fun!